If you were fortunate enough to be with us on Wednesday night for the wonderful Ash Wednesday service that we shared, then you may remember that our scripture that night, like our scripture this morning, is drawn from the 55th chapter of the book of Isaiah. The context for both of these readings is the same. The people of Israel had neglected God's laws. They took advantage of the poor. They sought security not from God, but in their own cunning and deal-brokering abilities. They disregarded God and found conforming to God's expectations to be too inconvenient. Finally, the inequality of their wealth and the decay of their institutions and their neglect of the call to be God's people led to catastrophe. The armies of Babylon laid siege to Jerusalem. After months of suffering, the capital city fell, and the people were dispersed across the Babylonian Empire as captives. Then the Babylonians brought in other conquered people and forced them to populate Jerusalem and the region surrounding the holy city, so that God's temple and God's city and the Mount of Zion was populated by people who were not part of the covenant. The 55th chapter of Isaiah is addressed to those exiles who were carried off. It was addressed to those people who had lost so much. Isaiah is writing to people who have no sane reason to think that the God who would not rescue them from the Babylonian siege would ever want anything to do with them again. They were certain that their yesterdays had wiped out any chance for a hopeful tomorrow. But then Isaiah comes along. The prophet comes along with an amazing message for these despondent deportees. Isaiah tells them that judgment and wrath are not God's final words to them. Isaiah reminds them that God is merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. The God that we meet in Isaiah 55 is a Lord near at hand. A God who is eager to forgive, a God of mercy. This God looks very familiar to those of us who are Christians. This is the God who searches tirelessly for lost sheep and who waits patiently for the tardy prodigals to return. The God Isaiah shows us is a God who balances forgiveness with expectation, who holds both judgment and grace together. In just a few more verses, Isaiah is going to call for those captives to return. But here in our scripture this morning, here in verse 1, God is trying to get the people's attention. God is trying to woo the people back. He says, "Yo there, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you that have no money, come buy and eat. Come and buy wine and milk without money and without cost." Thinking, wow, sounds like a Bernie Sanders rally. But there's more going on here than just free stuff. Some of you may recall that a few years back when AT&T was first rolling out its 4G network, they ran this brilliant campaign of adorable TV commercials. The ads featured a handsome, deadpan interviewer who was questioning angelic little quadrants of elementary school children. "What's the biggest number you can think of?" he would ask them. "Would you rather be a fast basketball player or a slow basketball player?" he would query. "Is it better to do two things at once or just one thing at once?" Predictably, the kids were enthusiastic in their proclamation that faster is better. That bigger is more, that doing two things at once sounds much better than just plodding along doing one thing at a time. The tagline for the ads was, "It's not complicated." Who wouldn't want faster? Who doesn't want more? The questions in the commercials were supposed to lead to the conclusion that we should all give AT&T monthly access to our credit cards. But the questions that were put to the kids, the questions put to those kids were designed to prop up the kinds of assumptions on which the Babylonian Empire was built. Is it better to have 2 exile captives doing stuff for you, or just one? Are you better off with the possessions you have, or do you want your stuff and their stuff too? Is it better to have patience and raise up and grow up and build up what you need for yourself? Or should you just take what you want from other people? This is what Isaiah was driving at. This is what he was getting at when he asked the captive Israelites, why? Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, your labor for that which does not satisfy? What's going on here, Isaiah wants to know. Whose values have you been taking on? His message to Israel is that you may not have a choice about being in a place where the rules make no sense to you. But the prophet says you have all kinds of say over whose worldview and what kind of values you adopt. Isaiah says you may live with Babylonians and work for Babylonians for now, but you don't have to be one. And you don't have to act like one. And you don't have to believe like one. You may know that on the first Sunday of Lent, many of the world's Christians are reading the story of Jesus spending 40 days in the desert where he was tempted by Satan. It's a story that has a lot in common with our scripture from Isaiah 55. There, as here, God's beloved are far from home. They're in a hostile environment. They're finding their identity tested. For Jesus, as for the Babylonians and Israel, the temptation is, will you take shortcuts? Can the end ever justify the means? Does might really make right? In both stories, but in different forms, the tempter comes and makes offers of satisfaction, strength, and pride. Isaiah is calling us away from the false promises of seeking security outside of God. Why would you spend your money on that which is not bread? Why would you expend your labor for that which does not satisfy? Why would you give your life for things that cannot give you life? These questions are a wake-up call for us. They're a wake-up call when we ourselves have nearly been seduced out of faith by the false promises of empire. These questions are a check and balance for us when we have wanted to succeed on our own terms instead of trusting in God's mercy. These questions offer relief when we have decided to gut it out rather than let God's mercy come to us. These questions offer life when we have bought into the phoniness of Babylon and AT&T rather than trusting the God who promises to give us what we need. Put more directly, what Isaiah is asking here is, what are you doing? Really? Have you thought about it? What are you doing? Why are you working for that which does not satisfy? Are you spending? for that which is not bread. The promise of this scripture is that the God who did not forget Israel, the God who did not write them off, did not forsake them, that God will not abandon you. God will not abandon you. You have a future. You are in God's hands. Don't believe the counter narratives. The summons of this scripture is to do what is in sync with the God of the gospel, the God who has another intention for our lives, the God who wants us out of the rat race of bigger is better, the God who has compassion when we do not have enough, even by doing two things at once. And here's the good news. The God who offered Israel a big do-over offers do-overs for you too. Your past does not have to define you. Your deficiencies do not control you. The mess you're in now is not the final destination for you. God has a future for you. God sees a better day for you. God offers redemption and grace. But you're going to have to choose it. You're going to have to drop what you're clinging to in order to receive what God has for you. You're going to have to let God be God and quit trying to do God's job yourself. Because it won't bring you life. Ultimately, it won't even buy you bread. It's not always easy. But it's really not complicated. And I promise you, you can do it. You really can. God will not abandon you.